I used to keep a spider plant named Copernicus on the windowsill of my office at Halverson University, and every morning when I unlocked the door, I would touch one of his trailing leaves just to feel something living before the work began. The work was everything then. 3 years of field research on adolescent memory consolidation, specifically how sleep deprivation in teenagers rewires the way traumatic events get stored, and I was close. Genuinely, frighteningly close to something that would matter. Dr. Fenwick Osei had recruited me personally out of my doctoral program at Northwestern, called me the sharpest emerging voice in developmental neuroscience, and I had believed him the way you believe someone when they have no reason to lie. His office was 2 doors down from mine and smelled like Ceylon tea and old paper, and he had this habit of leaning in when you spoke, as if your words were rare things worth catching. I brought him every draft. I talked through every dead end. When my mother died in October of my second year, he covered 2 of my seminars without being asked and left a handwritten note on my desk that said simply, "Keep going." I kept it in my top drawer. I trusted him with the parts of my work that weren't finished yet, the tender, unproven parts, the parts that could still be wrong. That is the kind of trust that takes years to build. That is also the kind of trust that, when broken, doesn't break clean. It shatters in a specific direction, and all the sharp pieces face inward. The first thing I noticed was small enough to dismiss. In late February, Fenwick submitted a conference abstract to the Society for Neuroscience annual meeting, which was normal, except that when I skimmed the title in the department newsletter, Sleep, Architecture, and Traumatic Encoding in Adolescent Cohorts, something in my chest went still. That was my phrasing, not a phrase like it. My exact phrasing, which I had used in a working draft I'd shared with him the previous November and then revised away from because the syntax felt too clunky. I told myself it was convergent thinking, that we'd worked together long enough to share a vocabulary. I told myself a lot of things in those weeks, mostly while standing in my kitchen at midnight staring at the kettle. I mentioned it once, lightly, asking if he'd pulled any language from my November draft, and he laughed, genuinely, warmly, and said we'd been collaborating so long he couldn't always tell where his ideas ended and mine began. Wasn't that the beautiful chaos of good research? I nodded. I went back to my office. I touched Copernicus's leaf. But that night I couldn't remember falling asleep, just suddenly being awake at 4 a.m. with my heart going fast for no reason I could name. Then in March, I found the pre-registration timestamp. Fenwick had submitted a formal pre-registration of a study to the Open Science Framework. My study, my cohort, my methodology, 6 days before he would have had access to my finalized protocol document. 6 days. That number sat in my throat like something I couldn't swallow. I said nothing. I went completely quiet in a way that must have looked like peace. I started keeping a second laptop at home, offline, where I documented everything with dates and file metadata and version histories I pulled from the university's shared drive. I found 3 drafts of his upcoming journal submission in a shared folder he'd clearly forgotten I still had access to, and I read them on a Tuesday evening with my office door locked and the lights off, reading by screen glow, and each page was worse than the last. Not paraphrased, not inspired by, lifted. Whole paragraphs from my Chapter 4, my statistical framework, my discussion of cortisol markers in Stage 3 sleep, all of it with the pronouns changed and my name nowhere. I was so careful. I photographed nothing from his physical office, touched nothing. But one afternoon he appeared in my doorway while I was cross-referencing his citation list against my own bibliography, and I felt my blood drop about 6 degrees before I looked up slowly and said I was just reviewing some lit for my revision. And he smiled and asked if I wanted tea, and I said yes, please, and he left. And I sat there absolutely still until I heard his kettle click on down the hall. I finished what I was doing. Then I closed everything and sat with my hands folded on my desk and understood, fully and finally, that the man who had left me a note that said, "Keep going," had been quietly gutting me for over a year. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I drove home, fed my cat Murray, poured a glass of water I didn't drink, and sat at my kitchen table for a long time in the dark. What I felt wasn't rage. Rage is loud and rage makes mistakes. What I felt was something much quieter and much more precise, like a lens focusing. I knew his journal submission was scheduled for April 14th to Developmental Cognitive Neuroscience. I knew the editor, Dr. Priya Chandrasekhar, had once attended a talk I gave in Portland and emailed me afterward to say my work was urgent and necessary. I knew exactly what documentation I had, what it proved, and in what order it needed to be presented. I also knew that Fenwick had a keynote scheduled at the Edinburgh Conference in June, that 2 junior faculty positions had been offered to candidates he'd recommended, that his whole reputation was an architecture held up by the perception that his ideas were his own. I made a list. Then I went to bed and slept better than I had in months. I contacted Dr. Chandrasekhar first, not with accusations, just a quiet note saying I had reason to believe a forthcoming submission contained substantial uncredited overlap with my unpublished work, and could I share documentation before the review process advanced. She responded in 4 hours. I sent everything: file metadata, version histories, the time-stamped pre-registration discrepancy, a 23-page comparative document I had prepared in 12-point Garamond with my original text in black and the lifted passages in blue. I then filed a formal research misconduct complaint with Halverson's Academic Integrity Office, attaching the same materials. I reached out privately to the 2 doctoral students he was currently supervising, not to tell them anything, just to ask how their research was going and whether they'd noticed anything unusual about how their work was being cited externally. One of them called me back in tears. I referred her to the Ombudsman's office and gave her the name of an attorney who specialized in academic IP cases. Then I waited. The journal pulled his submission. The misconduct investigation took 4 months. Halverson placed him on administrative leave in August, and his name disappeared from the Edinburgh program 2 weeks before the conference. His record is public now. I live in Reykjavik. I accepted a research fellowship at the University of Iceland in January, and my actual findings, under my actual name, were published in March. My office window faces a street where it snows sideways, and the light at 3 p.m. looks like the inside of a seashell. I got a new spider plant. I haven't named him yet because I'm in no hurry to trust anything that quickly again. The ones who study you closest are often just learning how to replace you.